To be everywhere is to be nowhere. Seneca. Leverage does not amplify returns. It compresses errors. It removes time. It removes forgiveness. It turns small mistakes into existential ones. This video explains why most systems are not built to survive that environment. Timeframe mixing is one of the most destructive failure modes in capital systems precisely because it does not look like a mistake. It looks like flexibility. It looks like responsiveness. It looks like being aware of what is happening across the market. In reality, timeframe mixing is one of the structural collisions between decisions that were never designed to coexist. Most people assume timeframe mixing means being confused about whether they are trading short-term or investing long-term. That is shallow interpretation. The real problem is not confusion. The real problem is simultaneous authority across incompatible time horizons. Timeframes are not preferences. They are operating environments. Each timeframe imposes different requirements on decision frequency, emotional tolerance, information relevance, and acceptable volatility. When these requirements are respected, systems remain coherent. When they are violated, systems do not fail immediately. They degrade quietly. Timeframe mixing usually begins innocently. Someone holds a position for long-term reasons while monitoring it with short-term tools. They tell themselves they are just staying informed. Price movements are observed that were never meant to be actionable. Commentary, meant for intraday participants, begins influencing long-term conviction. Nothing breaks yet. This is the first collision. Short-term information is allowed to influence long-term intent. Long-term positions are designed to tolerate noise. Short-term signals are designed to react to it. When noise is reclassified as information, tolerance erodes. The system starts asking questions it was never meant to ask. Should I reduce here? Is this still valid? Maybe I should wait for confirmation. These questions feel responsible. They are structural violations. Timeframe mixing also works in the opposite direction. Short-term strategies become infected with long-term narrative. A trade is entered with defined conditions. Price moves against it. Instead of exiting, the operator reframes the position as longer term. A loss is deferred. Risk expands. What was meant to be tactical becomes discretionary. Again, nothing breaks immediately. This is why timeframe mixing is so difficult to diagnose. Each decision can be justified independently. The system feels adaptive. In reality, authority is leaking across boundaries. A system can survive bad decisions. It cannot survive conflicting decision logic. Timeframe mixing collapses clarity. A single position begins to serve multiple purposes. It is simultaneously a trade, an investment, a hedge, and a belief. When outcomes survive, there is no clean way to interpret them. Was this a failed trade or successful long-term hold? Was this noise or signal? Learning stops. The most dangerous aspect of timeframe mixing is that it feels intelligent. The operator believes they are integrating information across horizons. They believe they are seeing the bigger picture. What they are actually doing is removing insulation. Insulation is what allows systems to function independently. Without insulation, the loudest timeframe dominates. That timeframe is almost always the shortest one. Short-term stimuli are more frequent, more vivid, more emotionally engaging. Over time, they override long-term structure. Long-term decisions begin to feel fragile because they are constantly being reevaluated with inappropriate metrics. This creates a constant sense of tension. The system never settles. Every movement invites reconsideration. The operator feels busy, vigilant, and involved. In reality, the system has lost its center of gravity. Timeframe mixing also distorts risk perception. Volatility that should be ignored feels threatening. Drawdowns that were acceptable feel dangerous. Conversely, short-term gains feel more meaningful than they are. The emotional amplitude of the system increases without any change in exposure. People often describe this state as stress or overthinking. The real cause is architectural. The system has no enforced temporal boundaries. This is why timeframe mixing often emerges after someone becomes more experienced. Increased access to information across horizons feels like an advantage. In practice, it increases interference. More visibility does not equal more control. Control requires separation. The conclusion of this section is narrow but critical. Timeframe mixing is not about choosing the wrong timeframe. It is about allowing multiple timeframes to issue commands at the same time. When that happens, good decisions cancel each other out. In the next section, we will examine how timeframe mixing expresses itself operationally, how systems quietly drift as positions are reinterpreted, rules are bent, and intent is rewritten without anyone explicitly deciding to change it. Timeframe mixing rarely announces itself as a change in strategy. It enters through reinterpretation. A decision made under one set of assumptions is slowly evaluated using another. Nothing dramatic happens. No rule is explicitly broken. The system simply begins to drift. This drift is what makes timeframe mixing so corrosive. The most common expression is retroactive justification. A position is entered with a clear intent, short-term or long-term. As conditions change, the original intent becomes uncomfortable. Instead of exiting or accepting the outcome, the intent is quietly rewritten. A trade becomes an investment. An investment becomes a hold. What changes is not the position, but the logic governing it. This feels adaptive. In reality, it removes accountability. Once intent can be rewritten after the fact, outcomes lose meaning. A loss is no longer a failed trade. A gain is no longer a successful execution. Everything becomes ambiguous. Ambiguity prevents learning, and without learning, systems stagnate. Another common mechanism is conditional patience. Long-term positions are said to be held as long as nothing changes. The problem is that nothing changes is undefined. Short-term volatility, news, or sentiment shifts are allowed to qualify as change. Patience becomes conditional on comfort rather than structure. This is how long-term strategies end up managed with short-term triggers. Monitoring frequency plays a critical role here. Systems designed for low decision frequency are subjected to constant observation. Each price movement, headline, or commentary introduces a micro decision. Even if no action is taken, cognitive load accumulates. The systems become emotionally active even when behavior remains unchanged. Emotional activation without action is not neutral. It erodes tolerance. Over time, this erosion leads to intervention. The intervention is rarely framed as abandoning the strategy. It is framed as being prudent, reducing risk, or waiting for clarity. Each intervention slightly alters the system's behavior. The original design is diluted. Timeframe mixing also appears through signal contamination. Indicators or information intended for one horizon bleed into another. Short-term indicators influence long-term conviction. Long-term narratives justify short-term hesitation. Signals lose specificity. The system stops knowing what information matters. When signals are no longer scoped, everything feels relevant. This relevance overload is exhausting. It creates the illusion that the system requires constant attention to function. In reality, the system is being destabilized by attention. Another subtle mechanism is outcome anchoring. A recent gain or loss disproportionately influences decisions across timeframes. A short-term loss makes long-term exposure feel unsafe. A short-term gain increases tolerance for a long-term risk. The system's risk profile shifts based on irrelevant feedback. This is how timeframe mixing amplifies emotional swings without changing exposure. Perhaps the most dangerous aspect of time frame mixing is that it feels responsible. People believe they are being flexible. They believe they are avoiding rigidity. They believe they are integrating information intelligently. In practice, they are allowing incompatible logics to coexist without hierarchy. A system cannot serve multiple masters. When short-term logic and long-term logic both issue commands, the system oscillates. Decisions are made and unmade. Conviction rises and falls. Nothing settles. The operator feels constantly in process. This constant process state is often mistaken for engagement or professionalism. It is actually a sign that the system lacks temporal governance. Over time, time frame mixing produces a specific psychological state: perpetual second guessing. Decisions are never final. Every outcome invites reconsideration. The system becomes fragile because it cannot commit. Commitment is not stubbornness. Commitment is clarity. Without clear temporal boundaries, clarity dissolves. Every decision becomes provisional. Provisional decisions cannot compound. They can only react. This is why time frame mixing does not produce obvious failure. It produces underperformance, stress, and a sense that nothing is working as it should. The operator feels busy but ineffective, intelligent but uncertain. The system has not become more complex, it has become incoherent. The key insight of this section is precise. Time frame mixing does not change what decisions are made. It changes how decisions are evaluated after they are made. That retroactive evaluation is what destroys system integrity. In the final section, we will resolve this structurally by showing why timeframes must be isolated, why authority must be scoped, and why the control layer exists specifically to prevent this kind of silent collision. By now, the failure pattern should be unmistakable. Time frame mixing does not arise because people choose the wrong time frame. It arises because multiple time frames are allowed to issue authority simultaneously. When that happens, every correct decision begins to cancel each other out. This is not a behavioral issue. It is a governance issue. Time frames are not styles. They are environments with incompatible rules. Each time frame defines what information matters, how often decisions are allowed, and what level of volatility is acceptable. When these environments are blended, the system loses coherence. Judgment is forced to mediate conflict it was never designed to resolve. Judgment is not a control mechanism. Judgment fluctuates. It responds to recent outcomes, emotional state, and cognitive load. Systems that rely on judgment to enforce temporal boundaries will fail under stress. Stress is exactly when boundaries matter most. This is why timeframes must be governed, not negotiated. Governance means that authority is scoped in advance. Certain decisions are permitted only at certain horizons. Certain information is explicitly ignored by design. Evaluation is separated from execution. These constraints do not reduce flexibility. They preserve it by preventing interference. When timeframes are governed, short-term volatility is no longer allowed to interrogate long-term intent. Long-term narratives are no longer allowed to justify short-term hesitation. Each timeframe operates independently, according to its own logic, without cross-contamination. This separation restores clarity. Clarity does not mean certainty, it means decisiveness. Decisions are made once, evaluated at the appropriate interval, and left alone in between. This prevents retroactive rewriting. Outcomes regain meaning. Learning resumes. Most people resist this idea because it feels rigid. They fear that strict temporal boundaries will cause them to miss important information or fail to adapt. In reality, adaptation does not happen at the execution layer. It happens at the design layer. Execution is not where intelligence belongs. When systems are governed properly, intelligence is applied during review, not during action. Review happens on a schedule, not in the response to noise. This is how systems adapt without destabilizing themselves. Timeframe governance also reduces emotional load. When decisions are not constantly revisited, emotional swings flatten. Volatility becomes tolerable again. The system feels calmer without becoming passive. This calm is often mistaken for disengagement. It is actually stability. Another critical effect of governance is accountability. When timeframes are isolated, it becomes clear what succeeded and what failed. A loss is either a failed short-term trade or acceptable long-term noise. A gain is either execution success or structural alignment. Ambiguity disappears. Ambiguity is what fuels second guessing. Without ambiguity, the system stops arguing with itself. Attention is freed. Confidence becomes structural rather than emotional. This is true role of the control layer in relation to timeframes. The control layer does not decide what to trade or invest in. It decides who is allowed to decide, when, and on what basis. It enforces separation between environments. It prevents short-term urgency from hijacking long-term structure. It ensures that good decisions are not undone by incompatible logic. Timeframe mixing is one of the clearest signals that the control layer is missing or incomplete. It reveals a system where authority has not been defined, where judgment is doing the work structure should be doing. Once governance is in place, timeframe mixing stops being tempting. Short-term noise loses relevance. Long-term intent regains integrity. The system becomes boring in the best possible way. Boring systems survive. The conclusion of this video is narrow and specific. Timeframe mixing does not occur because people lack discipline. It occurs because systems allow incompatible timeframes to coexist without hierarchy. When hierarchy is restored, good decisions stop canceling each other out. They compound. If you get some value from this video, you can go to CryptoOS system I have designed. You can do the test. You can find out what's your natural strength in the crypto industry, how you can progress. Or if you are advanced one, you can access CryptoOS and find the best possible path for you, so you can advance. Without going back down. If you made tens of millions of dollars or millions of dollars in this industry and you went back down, there are reasons for that. And in CryptoOS, you can find natural path and all of the reasons why you weren't able to maintain all of the money you have made. I hope that helps. I will see you in the next one. Take care.